And so now, for the main event, I would like to introduce Diane Reed. Diane and her husband Bruce have been coming to the church since September. This is their first summer, the first summer services, and she was gracious enough to accept my plea to offer something. I guess I'm convincing. I don't know. So she's going to talk today about curiosity. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'm curious about it too. So Diane, welcome.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? As she said, my name is Diane Reed, and I'm also a member of this church and a member of the parish committee and the worship committee. I'm also habitually curious. If a question comes up in conversation or I discover an interesting subject, I can't resist checking the internet, books, or the library to see if I can find the answer or the information that I'm looking for. I enjoy traveling to new places to learn about them. I tend to delve into subjects until I've satisfied my curiosity. A 2018 article in the Harvard Business Review opines about how one of the benefits of curiosity is that it enhances intelligence. Well, duh. The article goes on to consider dimensions of curiosity, has a list of them, but there's 3 of them that I thought really stood out. The first one is deprivation sensitivity, which they describe as a gap in knowledge, the filling of which offers relief. As an editor, that's a terrible sentence, but that one's for all of us who are looking for an answer and immediately turn into a book, phone, website. It's an itch that has to be scratched. When you get the answer, you finally feel satisfaction. The second dimension that they describe is joyous exploration. It's described as being consumed with wonder about the fascinating features of the world. I think joyous exploration includes a rather broad dimension. The world around us, art, music, history, print, online, traveling to places near and far, to name a few. We can also travel without leaving home, either as a preview of a trip or to a place we're unlikely to go to, like Mount Everest or the North Pole. The next one is social curiosity, and this fits us as like a glove. Talking, listening, and observing others to learn what they're thinking and doing. This is an extremely important and often overlooked dimension. Interacting with learning from others, asking someone about their work, their life, their interests, can open doors to friendships, community connections, and perhaps learning new skills. But to take advantage of these dimensions, we have to let our curiosity lead us, and that's not a given. While it seems clear to me that most of us here are at least born with some level of curiosity, it's clear that many people have lost it as adults. You don't have to consult Einstein or Harvard to know that most children are curious by their very nature. Just watch a baby discover their toes. And as soon as they can talk, children start asking questions. My 4 grandnephews, all under 10 years old, are bundles of curiosity. Almost every sentence ends in a question mark. Now, they remind me of myself as a child, asking my parents about all kinds of subjects. I also became an avid reader, so much so that I stuffed a towel under my door to mask the light by my bed so I could stay up late reading. Unfortunately, my parents found out. But when they figured it out, I simply moved into my closet with a flashlight. I'm not sure if it was in response to my multitude of questions, but before long we had a full set of the World Book Encyclopedia. My parents encouraged me to answer some of my questions by referring to the encyclopedia. Not only did it provide answers to many of them, I found myself browsing through the pages resplendent with photos, maps, and charts. Often this led to looking up other subjects, perhaps a person that was mentioned in another entry. Down the rabbit hole I'll go until my eyelids are closed in protest. Fortunately, so far I have not lost my curiosity, and it led me to a lifelong appreciation for learning. In an article, Old Man's Advice to Youth, Never Lose a Holy Curiosity. This was featured in Life magazine in 1955 by Albert Einstein. He says, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existence. One cannot help but be in awe when he contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. It's enough if one tries merely to comprehend a little of the mystery each day. Despite this era where information, entertainment, and unlimited resources are at our fingertips, it seems that electronic media can also become a curse instead of an opportunity to satisfy our innate curiosity. The internet, Google, and thousands of websites seem to have replaced my encyclopedia, but I've learned to be careful. It's easy to get seduced by bogus, misleading, or politically motivated material, especially at this time of the year. Be careful around the rabbit hole. It may lead to a well of disinformation. Know your source. For example, the first time we voted in Massachusetts, I tried to learn something about the candidates, and after consulting the internet, I couldn't find anything helpful. And I don't vote without knowing who the candidates are. But I dug a little deeper and found that there's a YouTube channel called Lakeville Cam TV, which is a public access channel that interviewed each group of candidates for the specific offices in really good detail. Because it featured them in person, I felt comfortable with the information, and I went ahead and voted. Because as we all know, what you see on the internet and even on television is not necessarily true. Check your sources. Today I find that if you're careful, you can find answers to some questions on the internet, being careful to consult reputable institutions and websites. Sites like the Library of Congress and National Archives are a treasure trove of original materials. And libraries, big and small, often have local history collections, documents, and hard-to-find books. Some of the collections may be available online. Many journals and publications are available on the internet, which in the past would have required a trip to a distant library. When I was working at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, one of our jobs as historians was to write for and publish Pennsylvania Heritage, our quarterly history magazine. The magazine staff was honored to have author and historian David McCullough come to speak with us. One of our editors asked McCullough how did he pick subjects for his books. He told us about a luncheon with colleagues that set him off on a quest to tell the history of the Brooklyn Bridge. After a discussion over lunch, he was so excited by the discussion of the history of the bridge that after lunch he found himself literally running up the steps of the New York Public Library, 2 at a time, full of curiosity. The result was his outstanding book on the Brooklyn Bridge. But my 17-year tenure at the Pennsylvania Historical Commission also resulted in one of the most amazing experiences in my life. The commission is responsible for over 20 historic properties, including a number of museums. But one of the most unusual ones is a replica of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry's ship from his decisive victory of the War of 1812 in the Battle of Lake Erie. And in the ship, there's actually one plank that is from the original wreck. It flies a historic flag, "Don't give up the ship." The U.S. brig Niagara is also an ambassador for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and while her home port is in Erie, Pennsylvania, the she's sailed on the lake and also on the Atlantic coast regularly. So I suggested that Pennsylvania Heritage publish an article about the ship for the magazine. And this, by the way, is the ship. It's 123 feet long. And originally there were several hundred crew members on it when it was in battle, but not for those of us who sailed on her more recently. So when I suggested the Pennsylvania Heritage publish an article about the ship for the magazine, okay, that sounds good. Well, now normally this might entail going up to Erie, interviewing the captain, take a few pictures, you know. But this particular spring, the Niagara was down in Philadelphia, having traveled down the Erie Canal and the Hudson River. She was being prepared for a trip up the New England coast to Nova Scotia and then heading home down the St. Lawrence River. Okay, curiosity alert. I thought, well, I wonder what it's like to sail on a tall ship. Wouldn't our readers be interested not only in the ship but the experience? Well, as it turns out, the commission and the captain thought that was a great idea. So, on a misty summer day, I reported to the Niagara in Bath, Maine, and my 3-week adventure began. And rather than just being a passenger, the captain welcomed me as a volunteer crew member for the next 3 days. I brought my sea bag and claimed my hammock below deck. We sailed out of Bath in the early evening. As a crew member, I was included in the watch, which this night drew bow watch from midnight to 2 a.m. As we sailed toward Nova Scotia, the bow parted the seas and revealed a wake of luminescent creatures. It was just the most amazing thing I think I've ever seen. As we sailed, this was just the beginning of an amazing voyage which included an impromptu race with Canada's schooner Blue Nose off Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. And because we are a military vessel, a playful cannon shot over their bow. And by the way, the Niagara beat them. So the weeks unfolded full of hard work and great camaraderie. We also had to be mindful of the weather, which resulted in us spending a couple of days in the small lumber town of Forestville, Quebec, on the St. Lawrence River, where the residents, strangely, came down to the dock with their lawn chairs to watch whatever we were doing, which was mostly swabbing the decks. But later, they invited us up to their pub for a pint or two of beer. And I think we all went. Well, I reluctantly said goodbye to Niagara in Quebec City, where I re-entered the 20th century. This is just a thumbnail of my voyage. If I had not been curious, I would have missed out on one of the most amazing experiences in my life. And this has a follow-on to it in that when my son graduated from college, he was working at a kind of a thankless job, and he complained to me one day about all of his friends were backpacking through Europe. So, and here he was, just on a regular job. And I said, well, the Niagara is looking for volunteers. Why don't you ask them about it? Well, long story short, he did. And so he spent the summer starting out as a volunteer, and then by the end of the summer, he was a paid crew member. This is a different year than when I went. And thinking that probably took care of his itch, I was surprised when he told us that he was going to join the Spirit of Massachusetts, which at the time was a school ship for Long Island University. It's now, I think, a restaurant, unfortunately. And so he did that during the winter after he got off the Niagara, and they sailed around the Caribbean, poor thing. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. That's probably it. And no. He went to Martha's Vineyard and worked on the Shenandoah, which is a school ship. And so he did that. And I said, okay. And so then he got a call, and it was from the Pride of Baltimore. And they said, we're going to make a trip to China. And would you like to go? Would you like to be a member of the crew? And so he sailed on a very cold November day, sailed from Baltimore and went all the way to China and Japan, and wow. And I thought, well, I think maybe this kid's going to make this some kind of career, because he could have. And he said, well, okay, that's good. I enjoyed that. Yeah, now I'm going to do something else. And of course, he hasn't gotten too far away from it, because he worked for the San Francisco Maritime Museum for a while. And then after that, and today he works for the Hudson River Maritime Museum. So at any rate, just a little aside here. So another amazing experience that sparked my curiosity was the search for my birth families. When I began the search decades ago, finding information, including access to birth and death records, genealogical sites, newspaper archives, DNA testing, and other resources were generally unavailable. But with the advent of the internet came electronic records, newspapers, genealogy sites, gravestone locations, and photos that led me to success where I had previously only had frustration. The result is that I found both my birth mother and father's families, and now have a good relationship with them. And perhaps more importantly, I now have a medical history. And I didn't realize how important that was until I found out my medical history. I hope that you can find the need to find out about something that you're curious about or fascinated with. It can apply to almost any aspect of our life, our work, our hobbies, our recreation. It doesn't even have to have a reason. If you're curious, follow your curiosity. Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson believed studying nature was crucial to developing a truly independent and self-reliant scholar. He saw nature as a source of spiritual and intellectual inspiration. He argued that the American scholar must be in close contact with the natural world to cultivate a sense of wonder and curiosity. And curiosity leads to learning, which brings me to one of the best places I know to learn, our Unitarian Universalist Church. The people who come to this church have brought their gifts to share with this congregation. Our Sunday services are full of topics that beg for further reading and discussion. Take advantage of the courses that come up on different subjects relating to UUism, other religions, and more. Take books out of our excellent library that's up in the parlor. Join one of our book clubs, and there's all kinds of activities that occur with the church. So please do take advantage of them. So let me finish with a quotation from T.H. White, author of The Once and Future King. "The best thing for being sad," replied Merlin, beginning to puff and blow, "is to learn something. That's the only thing that never fails. You may grow old and trembling in your anatomies. You may lie awake at night listening to the disorder of your veins. You may miss your only love. You may see the world around you devastated by evil lunatics, or your honor trampled in the sewers of baser minds. There's only one thing for them: to learn. Learn why the world wags and what wags it. This is the only thing which the mind can never exhaust, never alienate, never be tortured by, never fear or distrust, and never dream of regretting. Learning is the only thing which the mind can never fear or distrust and never dream of regretting. Learning is the only thing for you. Look what a lot of things there are to learn." So I leave you with curiosity. If practice leads to learning and knowledge, stay curious. Thanks. Any questions or anything? It's like, yeah.
Well, I'm totally aligned with you on this topic. Curiosity has been a saving for me in my life. You know, particularly when people have had a lot of trauma, people's depressed or fearful or more insular in our society and uncertain of the future, then the curiosity is the opening and the healing to that, I believe. I've always pursued that. I remember back in the 70s, there was a great time when we all, us young people, were interested in the nature of consciousness, and there were a lot of encounter groups, existential explorations. I was in Gestalt groups and so forth. We were really interested in moving through the psyche of the deeper mind, the deeper nature of people. I think we've lost some of that interest. And it's a little bit too information-driven now. I love information, I love knowledge, but I like to go deeper. So I really appreciate the topic. It's been really a wonderful grace in my life. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. Anything else? Well, yeah, my sailing days are kind of over, although I am going to go out sailing on a little sailboat out on Long Pond this summer. So, yeah.
Oliver has it, Harry. Oliver Hazard Perry, I know, has some connection with Rhode Island. There's in Newport, I think there's a yacht club that's named after him, and my curiosity was piqued when you mentioned his name. I wonder if you know anything more about him.
No, except that the Niagara was not the ship that he was. The ship that he was on during the War of 1812 actually was sunk, and he was transferred over to the Niagara. And but I don't know an awful lot about it. But there you go.
We'll have to look it up. There's a rabbit hole.
Isn't he the one that opened up Japan?
Opened up your what?
Isn't he the one that opened up the country of Japan when it was?
Oh, that's quite possible. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I liked the examples you gave, and what that reminded me from my own experiences is how you can very almost innocently be curious about something and start delving into it, and you never realize initially just how significant that little just side trip may turn out to be. Mm-hmm. It may, as with your son, lead to employment. It could have led to a career. I have found that in my life, where it has led to essentially a life-altering kind of shift and engagement with something else and going a direction I would have if you'd asked me, I would have said, "Are you nuts?" So it's really important to just be open to whatever comes along, catches your fancy.
Amen.
I'm going to let Jeff take that.
Ooh, I didn't do that.
Just a couple things. First, you never know. I when I was up on one of our Sundays here, I was talking about doing things, and you never know what you're going to stumble on. In doing my genealogy, I come up with John Morton, and John Morton is somebody that I didn't know anything about. I happen to have discovered him though in a Middleboro cemetery. His stone was there, so I checked him out and did things, and there only to have him show up on my genealogy. And then, just wondering about anything else about him, I went and looked in the encyclopedia, and John Morton is considered to be the first public school teacher. Not just in Plymouth. His parents were business people in Plymouth. John got educated well because his family had money, because in those days only families paid for their children to go to school. You didn't. But then he wanted to be a school teacher, and with that he literally built himself a one-room schoolhouse and started teaching school there, and a lot of the neighborhood kids desperately wanted to come to school but didn't have the money from their parents to pay what typically was there, so he let them come to his school. And so here's this guy who I had never heard about before, bumped into him in my genealogy, bumped into him in a Middleboro cemetery, and then bumped into him in the encyclopedia. He is considered the first public school teacher in the New World. and didn't know anything about them at all. So there are all kinds of things to discover. And I also wonder, you haven't been on old Ironsides yet?
I've been there, but I haven't been on it. Yeah,
No,
it's
sailing on it, but
No, I
you
haven't,
have been
no.
on it. But just another trip to visit.
I think I only was able to go on the Niagara because I worked for the commission. I mean, because I had no experience, and I never climbed, I never went up the mast or anything like that. So, that was, I could either take advantage of it or not, and I decided to go. So, yeah. Hi.
Your experience reminded me of one that Ray and I did about 5 years ago. We went with, and in case you're interested in going out on a sailing expedition, small scale, this is a great way to do it. We went with Rhodes Scholar on the Ketch Angelique out of Camden, Maine. We spent 4 nights on the ship in a tiny, tiny room. I mean, I couldn't even move my head without bump and raise, but there's also no chairs. You had to sit on cushions, and so some of the discomforts are clear, but getting out on the small islands, and as a naturalist, I just loved it. I took lots of photos, and I did a painting from one of them, and swabbing the deck and working in the kitchen. It kind of is a nice way to learn about it, small scale, and we were curious enough afterwards to take our car and go back to some of the places along the shore.
Thanks for the topic. I really enjoyed it, and the validation of it's okay to be a curious person, because my mother did not appreciate much of my curiosity. We have kind of a saying in our family. My kids will say whenever we have a crisis, Mom either reads a book or takes a course. And I love it. Many books and many courses if there's time, but that's usually accompanied by an eye roll. But what I'm wondering, if you notice, I've been having some conversations with younger people, and I'm wondering if you notice a decline in that kind of curiosity that you're talking about. Sometimes when I try to engage with my grandchildren about something that I think is fascinating, I get almost no response to it at all, just no interest. And I'm wondering if our age of technology and internet and being able to get information so quickly has had an impact on the generations that are coming up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it does have, it certainly does. And I don't know, I'm lucky. I think my son is of a different, he's 50 something now. And, I don't, there's so much interest in things like TikTok and this, that, and the other thing
Right.
that, you kind of have to go like this, swim through it to get to something that's of interest. And, so the internet can be really helpful, and it also, but I'm not sure. I imagine that somebody's going to have to study that, because I think it's an important point. Yeah. I wish I knew more.
Well, I obviously don't know for sure. I have had some younger people, just as an aside, mention that, well, I don't really have to learn a lot, because anytime anything specific comes up, I know where to find the answer. And I think that's the exciting and beneficial part of our technology, but it's also the flip side, that you can do both, and you really should do both. But I think we've been kind of lulled and have a false sense of our security on a number of levels, and informationally as well. We can find the answer if we need it. I don't have to learn anything in advance. And that's sad. That takes the fun out of it.
Yeah. I wish I had an answer for all these things, but I don't know. I think one of the things that worries me is about the disregard for learning history. As a historian, I don't understand that, because history, the word history is his story. And so really teaching history so that people would be engaged in and interested in and want to know more is to remember that it is a story. And that if you share a story with somebody, it might interest them more than simply being, I mean, in a history class where they say, okay, well, you know, class, you have to remember these dates, you know, when was this thing, you know, but not why. You know, why did Columbus discover America in 1492? I mean, there's, you know, he did, yes, okay, well, he didn't really. But you know, there's a story there that could interest somebody when, you know, when my stepson was in high school, and it was at the time when that series on the Vietnam War came out. It was an excellent series, and he had a terrible history teacher who, he was Mr. Mimeo, because he'd hand out a Mimeo at the beginning of the class, and basically he never taught, you know. And I said, you know, couldn't you assign that or suggest it as something if one of the students wanted to do, you know, go a little further in the subject? And he said, no, can't do that, you know. So there was resistance to anything that, I mean, none of these things in history are black and white. I mean, it's, well, yeah, but you know, there's so many nuances to things that people never get to. They get to the icing on the cake, but they don't have any of the cake, you know. So it's very frustrating. I'm having worked for a history agency, you know, even more so, you know, what you see and how little people actually value, you know, historical sites, histories, things like that, you know. So anyway, yep. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks.